Guys, in today's video, I'm going to share with you guys some of my mistakes that I've made and some mistakes that I've seen other photographers made that you should probably avoid in order to take better photos. Let's get into it. Starting with number one, and that's cranking that slider, y'all. When I first started, I discovered this cool little slider called the clarity slider. It made my images look so cool. I was going crazy with the slider, man, like just pushing it to 100 sometimes. If there is a 200, I would probably have pushed it to that as well because I thought it looked so cool. So I was pushing the saturation up and the vibrance up as well, and it just reminded me of when I first discovered that X-rated late night TV show on cable TV called Latin Lovers. As a hormonal teenager, I was just going off. I also had a tendency of overcooking my images when I first started, and as a beginner, you haven't trained your eye yet, you haven't developed that taste yet, that style yet, so you do the things that catches your eyes the most, right? And I just cringe now when I see my old edits because I know that it looks like overcooked. Because again, I would just push that clarity really high and as well as the contrast. Nowadays, however, I'm actually dialing back the clarity sometimes. Sometimes I'm going like minus 20 clarity for some images. Stop over editing by cranking that slider. Just because it's there, it doesn't mean that you have to use it. There are some things that I don't even touch when I'm in Adobe Lightroom now, so I don't use every slider that's available for me. Once you stop over editing and cranking that clarity and contrast to the max, you're going to see how much better your photos have improved. The second one is comparing myself to other photographers and feeling sorry about myself. I think this is something that we all do on some levels. We just get down on ourselves when we do this, and it discourages us from even wanting to try to get better. We just think like, you know, what's the point, and we just give up. They say that comparison is the thief of joy, which is true. However, there's another side to that if you choose to believe it or not. Comparison is the thief of joy, but contrast is a mother of clarity. How do you know where you want to be if you don't compare yourself to the people you look up to? So sometimes I would catch myself doing this from time to time where I say stuff like,
"Oh man, I just wish I was as good as photographer A or B."
Nowadays, if I do ever compare myself to a photographer like that I like, I'm actually more inspired by them. I don't beat myself up anymore. I look at their work and I ask what is working for them. And once I break it down and understand what I like about their photography, I try to incorporate that into my photography as well. And this is how you can improve. If you're gonna compare yourself, don't beat yourself up. If you're gonna compare yourself to others, be inspired, be motivated to improve. So that's the shift that I want you guys to move towards. Number three, not shooting at a fast enough shutter speed. Now this really hurt my photography in the beginning because I was doing a lot of low light photography. I was always told to keep your ISO as low as possible, and that is to not introduce digital noise and artifacts into your images. This is going to lead your images to looking soft, but by keeping my ISO low, I had to lower my shutter speed anyways to allow in more light to come in for, you know, good exposure. But by doing so, I actually made my photos look so much worse because my camera didn't have image stabilization at the time. So all my low light shots were actually soft and blurry because of the camera shake when I pressed the shutter button. So shoot at a fast enough shutter speed to keep your images sharp. The general rule for this is to shoot at 1 over double your focal length. So if you have a 50mm lens, you want to shoot at least 1 over 100th of a second and so on. But just to be safe, my minimum is actually higher than that. Nothing can go as low as 1 over 250th of a second, just to play it safe. Another mistake that I did was keeping my ISO under ISO 1000 no matter the circumstances. Back when I first started, I was afraid of going anything higher than ISO 800. Because I was shooting with a crop sensor body, I was afraid that digital noise and artifacts would creep into my images. I was so terrified of noise that it was a detriment to my photography. This goes back to my previous mistake that I made. Limiting myself to a low ISO because I didn't want noise in my images made me use a slower shutter speed where I didn't have the steadiest of hands. This led to soft looking images. It didn't have noise, but it was also misfocused and it just looked, you know, blurry as fuck because of the camera shake. It's not until I realized that sports and wildlife and bird photographers, they actually have their ISO really high. They are always shooting with a telephoto lens that starts like, you know, their aperture at like f8. And let's just say for bird photography, they need to shoot at a fast enough shutter speed to get the wings sharp. You catch my drift? So to compensate for that fast shutter speed that they're using to capture these birds flying, especially like hummingbirds, you know, they like flap their wings like crazy. And can you imagine a photographer having to shoot at a fast enough shutter speed to capture the details in the wings of the hummingbird, right? So they have their ISO like really high, maybe like ISO 3200 or like maybe like 6400 on like a bright day, or sometimes even higher. And that dawned on me that they would rather get an image that is sharp first with these noise than to keep it low and get a soft looking image from a slow shutter speed and, you know, add in motion blur and so on. Nowadays with high ISO noise levels, there are software like Topaz that can clean up that noise for you. There's also, you know, the Adobe's denoising AI software as well, and that works really well too to clean up some noise that you guys would have. So as of recently, I've been shooting at ISO 6400 because I know that I have the tools that can help clean that noise up. So again, don't be afraid of shooting at a high ISO when it calls for it, because you can always clean that up in post. The next one is different shooting scenario calls for different Lightroom adjustments. Now, I used to think that, you know, photography was some sort of like a mathematical formula, in a sense that if I can take this formula that I concocted for myself and apply it to my different photos, that it would look good no matter what. Let me explain. Back then, I would always add the same amount of clarity, the same amount of saturation, vibrance, and contrast to all my photos, because that was the formula that I told myself that, you know, if you add this, it's going to look good. Clarity would be plus 20, saturation would be plus 20, vibrance as well, and contrast, again, plus 20 as well. So after I finished with my basic adjustment and color grading, I would add all that into my photos. That was the formulas that made my photos look good, but I didn't realize the amount of light in the scene or not in a scene that plays a huge factor in this, in how your images will look. There are days where my photos looks heavily saturated because there was a lot of contrast in the scene from the sunlight to begin with. And then when I shot in like gray, cloudy conditions, these same formulas made my photos look like shit. And it's not until later on, from maturing and just understanding how light plays a huge role and how much colors and contrast should be added in an image, that I realized that this formula does not work. I kept doing the same thing over and over again, thinking that I would get different results. Again, I don't know what you guys would call this. I think it's called autism or something. Insanity nowadays. This is what the cool kids are calling it nowadays. Just because these settings work for one image, it may not work for another. So just keep that in mind when you have certain settings in mind. Another common mistakes I see other photographers make is that they don't understand or realize how much data is in a raw file. There's a lot of data in here, and if people stretch the file to its limit, you can see how capable a raw file is, and you can get so creative with your editing because of this as well. I always tell people to experiment with their RAWs. One common question that I get asked a lot is if I use flash in my photos. And the answer to that is no. It's always followed by,
how did you get your exposure on your subject to look so good then?
And that's because of years of experimenting with my RAW files. This is how I know that, you know, Fuji RAW files have good shadow recovery. So even if I underexpose my shot, I can always boost the shadows and the subject would look real good and still retain some details, because I've been experimenting with these RAWs for a very long time. Play around with your RAW and experiment to see how far you can push the file. The next one is not utilizing the filters in Lightroom. So we all know by now that photography is all about light and how you shape it. And the one thing that I didn't use a lot back then was these linear gradient filters and these radial filters to help enhance my images. I didn't realize it back then, but this is what people do. This is what people did to give their images a little bit more pop. With filters, you can hide certain elements away by lowering the exposure, or you can give someone a pop by brightening up their exposure. There are a lot of people who use these filters religiously, and it's how they're able to shape light so well in their photos. Yes, maybe they've taken a decent enough shot in camera, but they still need to work on it and massage it into the photos that you guys see and enjoy. And although some images can look good as is, like, you know, straight out of camera, if you want to be able to remove things and highlight things in an image, you must learn how to work with these filters in Lightroom or whatever editing software that you are using. The last thing that I see people not do is they don't shoot enough or they don't practice editing enough. People say they want to improve and get better, but they don't want to put in that work. If you want to improve your jump shots in basketball, you're going to need to go into the gym and practice your shots, make your free throws, and work on your shooting mechanics. People are always asking me, how do I get better at photography? And people are always looking at me as if I have some sort of cheat code to it. But the honest truth to this, and I know this sounds so cliche, but it's the God honest truth, you know.
You need to shoot more and you just need to edit more. Just some good old American hard work, y'all.
So I would suggest you just like take 1 hour out of your day just to go for a walk and start photographing what's around your area. I highly recommend this because you'll learn a lot in these walks. You'll learn about composition, you'll learn about different lighting depending on the sunlight on the days that you go out. And if you don't have the hour, try to go out for like half an hour or 15 minutes, whatever you can allow yourself to go shoot. If you don't have time to go out to take photos because you don't want to be outside, you can stay inside and learn how to edit. Spend 10 minutes a day editing your old photos. Like, again, you don't need to share it. You don't need to share it to the world. You just need to be practicing. When I first started and I got like really into photography, I used to edit an image every single day for a year straight. And I can honestly say that this alone is the reason why I improved so quickly. Spend at least 10 minutes every day just editing a photo. And with everything in life, you just gotta be consistent with it. And if you are, you're going to see an improvement in no time. All right, folks, there you have it. These are some mistakes that I made and some mistakes that I see other photographers have made. I hope you guys learned something here. And if you did, consider leaving me a like and subscribe to my channel while you're at it as well. Thanks so much.